On Monday, US PMIs on Tuesday, finally US GDP and initial jobless claims next Thursday. From New York City stateside, enjoy the long weekend. A deep breath for you all. It's been a long one. This is Bloomberg.
The U.S. has announced it's moving 8,500 more troops to Eastern Europe. If they're not being deployed to Ukraine specifically, why is that so important, and does that risk further provoking Russia?
Well, there's two things going on. So what the United States recently announced is that we are going to put 8,500 troops that are part of the NATO response force on high alert. That means they'll be ready to deploy on a moment's notice should we need those forces anywhere in Europe to protect NATO territory. In addition, the United States is also looking at possible additional moves that they might make to move U.S. force posture into Central and Eastern Europe. The reason we're looking at that is because a lot of the members in that neighborhood in Central and Eastern Europe feel concerned. And so we are looking at what measures we might take in the name of reassurance and deterrence.
Front Row, exclusive interviews with the most influential figures in finance. Lloyd Blankfein.
Deflation is a terrible thing. Inflation you could tolerate.
Kathy Wood.
Tesla will be in the pole position to dominate.
Jeremy Grantham.
We've had a very, very abnormal honeymoon Goldilocks period.
First available on the Bloomberg Terminal, then on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg.com. Front Row, the best seats in the house for business's greatest minds.
The capital markets can really help the shift to sustainable and decarbonized global economy. What are you noticing in that as ESG is now the buzzword literally everywhere?
It is definitely the topic of conversation in most meetings I have with company CEOs, with investors, with industry groups. It's amazing.
Pepsi's Number Fever campaign in the Philippines has probably gone down in history as one of the biggest marketing disasters in history, mainly because of a human error that led Pepsi to print more winning caps than they planned. The resulting chaos caused riots, civil unrest, and even deaths. Reporting this story took over a year, and it resulted in me flying to Manila in the Philippines to meet unlucky winners and to find out exactly what happened back then in the 1990s. My name is Jeff Maish. I'm a journalist based in Los Angeles. I wrote the story for Bloomberg Business Week about Pepsi's Number Fever campaign. The Philippines is a really interesting country. It's made up of thousands of islands. And it's also a country that's very heavily influenced by America. American culture is everywhere you look in the Philippines. They're obsessed with Frank Sinatra music, for example. They love all things America, and that extends to their love for soft drinks, Pepsi-Cola, Coca-Cola. In the 1990s, it was everywhere. Pepsi and Coca-Cola were embroiled in what is now known as the Cola Wars. It was a fierce battle for market dominance. Number Fever was already a really popular promotion. It had been rolled out in America to great success. And so Pepsi decided to roll it out internationally, particularly in Asia. They thought it was the answer to their problems. They thought it could finally help them beat their biggest competitor.
Look for the winning number in sari stores every day, also on TV, radio, newspapers. You could be a millionaire.
$1 million pesos, or $68,000, doesn't sound like a lot now, but in 1992, that was a phenomenal amount of money. You've got to remember that in the Philippines at the time, the average monthly income was about $100, so $1 million pesos was wealth beyond anyone's wildest imaginations. Number Fever caught fire in the Philippines. Kids were saving up their pocket money to buy a bottle of Pepsi. Parents were squirreling away all of the bottle caps in bags. You would walk down the street and people were going through trash trying to find discarded bottle caps. It was a national phenomenon. Pepsi boasted that half the population of the Philippines was playing it. Number Fever boosted Pepsi's sales every month from $10 million to $14 million. It had a huge impact on Pepsi's bottom line. Number Fever quickly became number hysteria. Maids were being jailed for stealing their employers' winning bottle caps. There was even some murders over winning bottle caps. People were fighting in the streets over these caps. There were signs that there were going to be problems with Number Fever very early. Pepsi had rolled out the competition in Chile, and a garbled fax had caused some kind of problem with the winning number. They'd announced the wrong one in Chile, causing riots. There were signs that there could be big problems ahead if they didn't keep their eye on the ball. So in 1992, Pepsi decided to extend the campaign in the Philippines, and they announced that the competition would go on for a few more weeks. One night, on the television news, they announced the latest winning number, 349. The problem was, 349 had already been allocated as a non-winning number in earlier campaigns. So there were literally hundreds of thousands of bottle caps with 349 just floating around the Philippines. Hundreds of thousands of people all across the Philippines, thousands of islands, were finding winning bottle caps. 349, 349. Some people had 10 lucky 349 bottle caps. People were dancing in the streets, celebrating. They thought their problems were over. They were millionaires. It's still not certain exactly how many winners there were of lucky 349 bottle caps, but we know that Pepsi printed over 600,000 of them. Pepsi realized very early that there was a problem. Hundreds of people started arriving at their bottling plants with their lucky bottle caps. They realized something was seriously wrong. Pepsi tried to solve the problem by offering a small token donation to anyone that brought a lucky bottle cap to their bottling plant. But it wasn't enough. People didn't want just a handful of pesos. People wanted their $1 million peso prize. Within a year, violent protests and riots outside Pepsi factories would leave dozens injured and 5 people dead. At one Pepsi factory in the Philippines, a grenade was thrown through the window. It killed 3 Pepsi employees. Anacita Rosario was a school teacher living near Manila in the Philippines. She was one of the tragic victims of this whole thing. She was walking to a nearby store to buy some rice one day when a Molotov cocktail was thrown at a Pepsi truck in a violent protest. It bounced under the truck and exploded. It killed her and an innocent bystander who was just a child and injured many others. When I was in the Philippines, I tracked down Anacita's daughter, Cindy, and her husband, Raul. It was clear to me that they were still very upset by the whole thing. You know, a family had been ripped apart by this competition. And Raul told me that he'd never remarried. He'd told me that he'd gone to meet Pepsi executives after his wife was killed, and he was angry. He said to them, you know, this wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for you, if it wasn't for number fever. The biggest revelation from my reporting was rumors that Pepsi was somehow involved in bombing their own trucks. I found a newspaper report with a headline that said, "Pepsi goons bomb their own trucks." And when I visited the NBI, the police department in the Philippines, they presented me with documents and interviews with people who claimed that Pepsi had paid them to cause riots and to cause trouble outside their plants in order to destabilize the situation and to frame the owners of the coalitions that were fighting them, to try and curry favor. I just thought that was so shocking. And of course, Pepsi denied it, but how bizarre that a company would be accused of bombing their own trucks. The contest had sparked so much anger in the Philippines because it landed at just this really weird time in the Philippines' history. It was during a crazy election that was racked with allegations of fraud. The Philippines was in a kind of love-hate relationship with America. They loved, obviously, the American aid and finances that was pouring into the country, but at the same time, they yearned for independence. They wanted to be their own country. Vicente Del Fierro was a local preacher living in Manila, and he hated the Number Fever campaign. Del Fierro thought Pepsi's Number Fever campaign was just one of the many ways that America was asserting its dominance over a third world country. He hated seeing his fellow countrymen get ripped off, in his eyes, by this huge multinational American company. He wanted justice. Del Fierro rounded up over 800 winners of 349 bottle caps, and he got them all together to sue Pepsi for over $400 million to be divided between those holders of lucky bottle caps. Del Fierro took money from some of the people who could afford it. They paid him 500 pesos to help with legal fees, but for people who couldn't afford the money, he would just represent them pro bono.
The alliance is to build up pressure on Pepsi. And so you see people marching in the streets. So we have mounted our own campaign, even in the U.S.
He flew to America and he hired two consumer lawyers here in America to take on Pepsi. He had a meeting at Pepsi's headquarters to try and resolve the problem, but he said he wanted to take it all the way to the highest courts in America. When those cases were heard in America, those courts decided that this was a problem that should be heard in the Philippines, not in America. Back in the Philippines, Del Fierro continued his case in the Filipino courts. At one stage, there were arrest warrants handed out for 9 Pepsi Cola executives, which he saw as a big victory. We don't know if those arrest warrants were ever upheld, but it made newspaper headlines across the country. Pepsi did not take kindly to Del Fierro's campaign. They tried everything to shut him down. They sued him for libel.
My father had to attend 3 times a month for a branch 145 and another hearing for the branch 113, also 3 times a month. Also, there was a time my father was hospital due to heart failure. Still, he had to attend the 2 branch hearing. Otherwise, for not attending, the judge will issue a warrant of arrest to my father. My father passed away January 13, 2010. After staying for almost 1 year in the hospital, he died of complication due to heart failure. After the death of my father, I was inspired to do the website. PepsiCo will be remembered for what they did to the consumer in the Philippines and to my father.
When I reached out to Pepsi for comment for this story, They claimed that they didn't have access to anyone who was working at Pepsi that was around in those days. They also said that during COVID-19 they didn't have access to their documents about this, but you know, they were very careful to say that they were sorry for everything that happened, and we do know that Pepsi did try everything to try and make this right. The Pepsi number fever disaster cost the company millions. We know that they paid up to $10 million in those goodwill payments, but the financial effect could be much greater. After the disaster, we know that Pepsi sales dipped. They were overtaken by Coca-Cola again. Pepsi's number fever disaster changed the legacy of that soft drink in the Philippines forever. Some people of a certain age won't touch it. For many people, Pepsi is a taboo word. A lot of the people that I spoke to were still quite traumatized by their experience, by that experience of winning $1 million pesos, losing it, and then returning to their normal life in poverty in Manila.
When the news of the bombing came out, it was a massive story in Germany.
We are following some breaking news coming to us out of Dortmund in Germany.
It was covered by all the media outlets.
3 roadside explosions triggered at the same time last night as the coach left its hotel in the south of Dortmund.
Public figures commented on it.
We should not let them affect our life, whoever it was.
The media echo went far beyond Dortmund.
I think it was front page news in every single big paper around Europe. Everyone thought of like a terrorist attack, and people were scared that throughout the city in Dortmund there was more attacks to be happening.
Unbeknownst to investigators, just after the bomb went off and the players of the team were shell-shocked, the person who had masterminded the attack was actually sitting in the hotel eating steak and sweet potatoes. My name is Thomas Rogers. I'm the journalist who wrote the article, The Get-Rich-Quick Scheme That Nearly Killed a German Soccer Team. Dortmund is a mid-sized city in the western part of Germany in a state called North Rhine-Westphalia. And it's a former industrial city that's kind of fallen on hard times in the last few decades. It was severely bombed in the war, so the center of the city is quite stark. Some of the few high points include its soccer team.
My name is Ike Henning. I'm a reporter with Bloomberg News, and I'm a great fan of Borussia Dortmund. Dortmund fans are super loyal. On all match days, the entire city is in black and yellow. It's like a religion.
I think more than most German cities, soccer does play a very large role in the identity of Dortmund. In October of 2000, the BVB became the first team in the Bundesliga to actually go public. Salaries for soccer players in the Bundesliga have gone up very dramatically. With such high prices, they thought that by going public, they would be able to compete better with big teams like Bayern Munich.
Unfortunately, that didn't go too well. Dortmund bought too many expensive players, high wages, and the club almost went bust in 2005.
The price of their shares, it has sometimes gone up, but mostly gone down since they made that decision. So on April 11th, 2017, the team was staying in a hotel on the outskirts of Dortmund.
Match days are always special in Dortmund. Everyone is looking forward to it. The team always meets in the same hotel ahead of matches.
They stayed in this hotel in order to have a kind of neutral space before games so that they could concentrate, be sort of isolated from distractions, things like that.
Everyone was pretty optimistic they had a chance to go really far, maybe into the finals. I was in the office and getting ready for match day. I was going to meet with a friend, a fellow Dortmund supporter, in a pub. As always, the fans are very excited about matches.
On that day, they were heading to play in the quarterfinal against AS Monaco at Signal Iduna Stadium, which is in the center of Dortmund. Shortly before 7 p.m., the players of the team boarded their official team bus.
When the bus took off the parking lot of the hotel and turned on the street, there were three detonations, 3 bombs that exploded and hit the bus of Dortmund.
3 explosions occurred close to the Borussia Dortmund team bus. The B team bus had just left the hotel. The explosions destroyed 2 windows in the rear part of the bus.
People screamed, people jumped to the ground.
The fellow Dortmund fan I was supposed to watch the match with, he called me and said, turn on the TV, there was an attack on the Dortmund bus. And I thought he was like, that was impossible.
Some of the players screamed at the driver to keep driving as fast as possible because they were worried that people might storm the bus.
German investigators say the explosive devices used in the attack on the Borussia Dortmund bus contained metal pins, and that one had pierced a seat headrest.
Unbeknownst to the team members, the actual mastermind behind the attack was, as they were disembarking, the bus was actually eating steak and sweet potatoes at the hotel they had just left.
Authorities are attempting to verify a letter left at the scene claiming jihadists were behind the attack.
Because there had been a series of attacks by Islamic terrorists in Germany and Europe, there was widespread suspicion in the media that this was another Islamic terror attack. 3 letters were found at the site of the bombing that took credit for the attack on behalf of Islamic State. There were, however, reasons to doubt this particular narrative.
Would actually be a surprise if ISIS were actually part of this attack. Possibly could be employed by other groups like the far right wing to try and shift the blame.
The letters had some strange qualities. They were written in a strange German that used big, sophisticated words, but had basic grammar mistakes, as if someone was native German speaker, but pretending to be a foreign person.
Federal investigators have detained 1 man suspected of links to Islamist terrorism, one of 2 suspects whose apartments were raided this morning.
Shortly after the bombing, a man in Austria named Rudolf, who was a big BVB fan, he noticed that something strange was going on the stock market related to the team's shares. He emailed the lawyers of BVB, who then forwarded that email on to investigators. The email stated that someone had bought 60,000 BVB put options, a wager that the value of the shares of the team would fall below a certain amount at a certain date.
Why would someone buy that ahead of a match and then 3 bombs go off? Something isn't right here.
For the person to make money off of that, it required the stock to go down quite a bit in a fairly short period of time. And it wouldn't just be the team losing a match, it would require something much bigger than that. There was another big red flag about this purchase, which is the fact that it had actually been made, number one, on the day of the bombing, but also from an IP address that had been traced to the actual hotel where the bombing had taken place.
When 3 explosions targeted the bus carrying the Borussia Dortmund footballers on April the 11th, written notes left at the scene claimed the attack was the work of ISIL. The truth, as is now alleged, is remarkable.
On April 21st, the police arrested a man in a southern German city called Tübingen. He was on his way to work, and his name was Sergei Benagold. He seemed like an unlikely suspect because he had no known connections to the Islamic terror world. He didn't seem like a far-right extremist. He didn't seem like a left-wing extremist either. He seemed to be a completely unremarkable young man.
A 28-year-old German-Russian man, named only as Sergei W., stayed in the same hotel as the players on the night before the bombing. He specifically requested an upper room overlooking the bushes where the explosive devices were hidden.
The media dissected why he would do that, what was his past.
He had been inspired by the 2015 terror attack in Paris. And he noticed that in the aftermath of the attack, the stocks of French companies went down. And he believed that if an attack took place that was directed at a specific company, that the decrease in stock price for that company would be even more dramatic.
It never occurred to anyone that someone would do that out of greed.
We now know that the suspect bought 3 different derivatives on the Borussia Dortmund shares. With all these derivatives, he bet on falling shares. The suspect bought the majority of these financial products on the 11th of April, the day of the attack.
If the plot had been completely successful and the stock had reached a value of 0, Vaynergold would have made up to 570,000 euros, or the equivalent of about $608,000. Ultimately, the plan completely backfired.
The attacker, Sergei Vaynergold, didn't make any money. In fact, he lost money.
In court, he would be extremely quiet. He usually kept his hands clasped together. One of the lawyers actually commented that he had never seen a defendant act so calmly. Vaynergold had served some time in the German military. From that information and from online research, he was able to figure out how to assemble remote detonated bombs that would do what he hoped to do. There were a few days of extremely emotional testimony, including the soccer players who described doubting whether or not they could ever play another game again.
It brought everything back up, and it didn't quite help them to kind of process what was going on.
Throughout it all, he sat there completely silent. The big mystery that was swirling around the trial was the question of why. He may have simply done it because he wanted to impress a woman. Rebecca is a young woman who has a very troubled home life. She ultimately sees her relationship with Vaynergold as an opportunity to leave that troubled home. Vaynergold is a Russian immigrant to Germany. He speaks with an accent. He has anxiety in large groups of Germans. She begins to resent the fact that he has these fears and feels a little bit trapped. Rebecca attempts to dump him on multiple occasions, and he threatens to commit suicide if she leaves him. Vaynergold apparently told Rebecca that she would soon be seeing a surprise. After being dumped via text message, he apparently began planning for this attack in earnest. Vaynergold was charged with 28 counts of attempted murder, which carried a maximum sentence in Germany of life in prison. He claimed that he had nothing to do with the attack, but as time went on, he admitted that he had actually been the person who had built the explosives and had set them off. But he claimed that he didn't want to actually kill anybody. Ultimately, Vaynergold didn't receive the harshest possible sentence. He was given 14 years in prison, but it's still a considerable amount in jail in Germany.
The threat of an asteroid hitting Earth is very real. If it's big enough, it's also very final.
These are very, very infrequent events. The probability is not 0, though.
A blinding flash of light streaking across the sky.
About 100 tons of space rock falls on Earth every day. Most of it is so small it burns up in our atmosphere or lands unnoticed away from major populations. No human in the past 1,000 years is known to have been killed by a meteorite, and according to NASA, no large object is likely to strike the Earth any time in the next several hundred years. However, one thing is certain: we haven't found them all.
There are thousands out there, and we don't know where they are.
There are a lot of asteroids in our solar system. They number in the billions.
Scientists all over the world are working toward detecting and deflecting the most catastrophic of natural disasters.
The race is on to find as many of these objects as we can.
We have a way of calculating whether or not an asteroid is potentially dangerous or not.
I mean, I think it's something worth investing in. It's our existence at stake, right?
Amy, let's get this one out of the way. It's probably the question you get asked the most, but how scared should we be?
Asteroids and comets are a natural hazard that's out there like a lot of other natural hazards. These are very, very infrequent events, these collision events, where an object actually impacts the Earth. The most important thing that we need to know about asteroids is when the next impact is going to happen and how bad it will be. What we know is that an object that's about, say, a kilometer across is capable of causing very, very wide devastation across the planet, really, truly global devastation. The object that wiped out the dinosaurs was somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 10 kilometers across, so even bigger than that. At a kilometer, it's still going to be very bad and it will have global effects. For objects that are capable of causing what I would call sort of regional damage, kind of a large major metropolitan area, a city and its surrounding environment, sort of around 100-ish meters. It depends on the details of the composition and so forth.
By the 1980s, NASA was cataloguing near-Earth objects. In 1994, stargazers watched as comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 hit Jupiter. The resulting zone of chaos was estimated to be as large as the Earth, and the event became a turning point in the search for asteroids and comets in our solar system. In 1998, Congress tasked NASA with finding 90% of asteroids and comets 1 kilometer wide or larger. Soon after, Hollywood blockbusters Armageddon and Deep Impact brought attention and fear to the masses.
The great news is that the vast majority, more than 90% of all the really large 1 kilometer near-Earth objects have been found. The challenge now is working down to these smaller sizes that are still quite capable of causing a lot of damage, but they're just harder to spot because they're fainter, they're smaller.
Can you give us a sense of how many are out there in our solar system?
We know that there are a lot of asteroids in our solar system. They number in the billions. Most of them, however, are between Mars and Jupiter in what we call the main asteroid belt. This is a region of space where most of the asteroids in the inner part of our solar system live, and they stay there for many billions of years. There is another population, though, that kind of leaks inward and gets into the region somewhat close to the Earth, and we call these near-Earth objects. We think that there are millions and millions of near-Earth objects that are out there in the total population. As of today, we know of sort of around 20, 25,000, something like that. When we first spot an object, we really know very little about it. We just see something moving across the sky. So all you get is just sort of a handful of snapshots, just enough to be able to tell that this isn't an asteroid that we've already seen before. And then once we can calculate the distance to it, we can now start to make predictions about its true size. Is it large or is it small? So we have a lot of information that we have to get pretty quickly to really understand what's going on.
Finding asteroids is just one piece of the puzzle. Planetary scientists are extremely skilled in determining the orbits and speeds of asteroids based on relatively small amounts of data. NASA runs simulations of the trajectories asteroids could take, which is useful but time-consuming. A team of scientists in the Netherlands have found a way that could buy us more time.
Our method is very quick. So you can very quickly